Today, most Madison High School students pass by this structure at 105 Ridgedale Avenue in Madison, New Jersey, on their way to school, not knowing about its historical significance. But this group of Madison High School history detectives participating in the Luke Miller House Forging History project now have a much greater appreciation for the house and its place in their community.
My favorite part of the project was that it was something so close to home. It was a house that I drive past every day on my way to school, and I never knew what was there. So I thought it was fascinating to see what goes on in our own backyards.
Noted author and New Jersey historian John Cunningham explains why this is such an historic treasure.
I don't think there's any house quite like the Miller House in all of New Jersey. There are bigger houses, there are places where Washington slept, but this is a place where a blacksmith prospered, and this is a place that tells us about common life. And that's the one thing that we are most missing in our study of history.
The 1.5-acre parcel of land on which the house stands was purchased from the Indians by early American settler David Burnett in the first half of the 18th century. He then sold the property to Andrew Miller, Luke Miller's grandfather. Built sometime between 1730 and 1750, the Luke Miller House is of the bank house variety. Town historian Marianna Holden says this modern-day schematic shows the house was built into the hillside to provide stability and insulation.
It's probably the best example of what we today call green building, because it was built right into the ridge of Ridgedale Avenue, which runs east-west on and sort of perpendicular to Ridgedale Avenue itself. It uses the hillside to incorporate the rocks for not only stability, but also the warmth for the insulation and also the cooling effect in the summer.
Mark Texel, the director of historic sites of the Morris County Park Commission, tells us more about how the house looked with its early American architectural features.
The way the house looks in 2007 is not that different. One exception would be the house today is painted white, and at that time that would have been a luxury. So you would have seen a clapboard house of a fairly simple rectangular style with a hall, parlor, kitchen, basic features of a home, a chimney on each end of the building for heating the house, and that would have been it. And over the years, the clapboard weathered, and there's an account in 1901, I think, where it talks about the boards being a nice, rich red color. So maybe it was built from cedar or chestnut or cypress or something local that was probably split by a sawmill and built that way.
Maps of the area indicate that there were other buildings on the property, including a forge and a cider house. This forge, or blacksmith shop, was an area where iron bars, most likely produced locally and purchased by Luke Miller, were worked into a variety of products, such as axes and horseshoes.
I think that blacksmith shop may have moved over time. The building that's there now is a newer building than would have been there in the 18th century, but they could have continued blacksmithing as a trade on that site for 100 years, because it was important for the local citizens to not just have their horses shod, but to make things from iron.
In addition to the blacksmith shop, another prominent structure on the property was a cider house. Texel explains why this building was also important.
If you were a farmer and you wanted to preserve your apples, the way to do that was to ferment that. You'd first crush the apples, extract the juice, and then you put that and you let that freeze. And of course, you skim off the ice, and what you're left with is the more alcoholic portion of your cider. And you could store that in a cider house or keep it in a cider house. So it's pure speculation, but my thought would be the cider house might be where they stored their hard cider, or where they made it, where they crushed their apples and then let it set and ferment.
Especially intriguing to researchers is a brick-lined tunnel leading from the house to the blacksmith shop. Some believe the tunnel was a conduit leading to a cistern. Others say it may have served as a safe haven from Indian raids. And still others feel that it might have served as a station stop along the Underground Railroad in later years. Texel and Holden both have views on this interesting feature. First, Texel.
What we think the tunnel may have been used for was a conduit for a cistern. Since it's made of brick, They found some similar ones like this with a long tunnel and a 5 to 7 foot brick vault, and it was used basically to hold water. And if there was a spring nearby, it's a way to capture the water and feed it into a chamber for holding for water.
It's a very good possibility that it was used for Underground Railroad, simply because there's some reason it's called Miller's Station, and it passes along. Familiar that in the Underground Railroad there were conductors, there were station masters, and then there was the actual station, so it would make sense that it was a stop.
It's likely it was used as a water feature. That might be the most logical explanation. And it's probably more unlikely it was used to shelter runaway slaves. Could it have been used as a place to hide from an Indian raid? Absolutely. Was it built for that purpose? It's one of those history's mysteries, I guess you could say.
After hearing different interpretations about the property, U.S. history students at Madison High School became history detectives to learn more. These young scholars visited the Luke Miller house and property, Luke Miller's family gravesite, the Madison Historical Society, the Madison Library, the North Jersey History Center at the Morristown and Morris Township Library, and the Museum of Early Trades and Crafts in Madison, New Jersey, in order to dig up the past. They also interviewed local historians for perspective. Here's what they discovered. The local history of the region begins in the late 17th century with the early settlement of the area known as Bottle Hill. No one knows whether the name Bottle Hill stems from the irregular shape of the original 870-acre parcel that comprised present-day Madison, or was it for another reason?
Bottle Hill Tavern was the reason the area got the name Bottle Hill as a sort of a common or colloquial name. We're actually part of Hanover Township, and because there was a tavern at the intersection of Ridgedale and Park Avenue, and most people were illiterate, they had a sign to be able to depict what was going on in this establishment. So there was a bottle, actual physical bottle, that hung from a pole on the hill of Bottle Hill. So that's how we got the term.
Many of the settlers that eventually resided in the Bottle Hill area came from near and far, including the Miller family, who moved to this area from Long Island. The population consisted mainly of English and Welsh, although there were also Dutch, Scots, and Germans. Most of the settlers were members of the Presbyterian Church, a major religious as well as governmental power of the time period. During the Revolutionary War, George Washington favored this area because he knew the Presbyterian Church was strong and that he had allies, including Luke Miller, in and around Bottle Hill.
It was Presbyterian country, and that's one of the reasons why Washington came to the area, because he knew that where the Presbyterian Church was strong, so would popular emotion be in his favor or in favor of the war.
The new settlers were attracted by the rich farmland and flowing streams which could be used to power a grist mill, and later attracted by the iron ore embedded in the hills. The availability of iron would become particularly crucial to the Miller family, who were in the blacksmithing trade, and to the Revolutionary War effort.
Iron was a key natural resource, and in fact it really spurred the whole settlement of much of Morris County. Once they discovered deposits of iron in the early 18th century, 1710 to 1720, and that brought both iron masters and miners into the area.
The house known today as the Luke Miller House was built by Luke Miller's grandfather, Andrew, sometime around 1750. His son Josiah, a blacksmith, was the father of Luke Miller, who was born in this house in 1760 and lived there for 91 years until he died on January 23, 1851. During his lifetime, Luke was married 3 times and fathered 11 children.
He received about 17 acres or thereabouts. I think the Miller property, including what was called the Luke Miller House or Miller Station, it didn't really grow over time. I don't know the exact total number of acres, but it stayed the same, and then it was split up between his heirs and then their heirs. So over time the land gets to be split up into smaller and smaller pieces. But none of the 3 Miller children expanded the property. So that's something that's kind of unique, that it maintained its same size over the next really 150 to 200 years.
Luke Miller was an important figure in the early American community of Bottle Hill. As a landowner, he was a powerful member of society.
The only power that anyone had was through land ownership. People who owned land were called freeholders. That lives on in the board of freeholders. They had full power to do as they wished, literally.
Along with his brothers Joseph and John, who lived on adjacent properties, Luke was a respected farmer and blacksmith. He ran a working cider house on his property and was a militiaman in the Revolutionary War. As a blacksmith, Luke Miller also served as a master to many apprentices. An apprentice, Charles C. Force, worked with Luke Miller for 8 years. He then became a blacksmith on the Sayre farm down the road and later founded the Madison Iron Works. Force's important influence on the future through utilizing more modern technology for the ironworks was spawned in Luke Miller's blacksmith shop, where, together with Miller and other apprentices and workers, they created tools and implements vital to the area. The property played an integral part in the early economy of Morris County, as travelers from around the area would have their horses shod, coach wheels repaired, and tools made and repaired. Not only did farmers and other local workers require the skills of a blacksmith, the forges in the Bottle Hill area were critical to the war effort. Local lore even says that George Washington's horse was shod at Luke Miller's forge. In general, the entire Bottle Hill area was important during the Revolutionary War.
The Bottle Hill-Morristown region, with its highly patriotic citizenry and hilly terrain, seemed to offer the best hope of safe haven to those fleeing the British advance. Bottle Hill represented an important part of this defensive strategy.
Luke Miller's contributions to the war effort were many and varied. His home was a hospitable and welcoming billeting place for war-weary officers moving through the area toward the encampment of Lawantaka Valley.
The home was situated strategically between an outpost in Chatham and General Washington's headquarters in Morristown. Both officers and men received welcome there, and many distinguished men frequented the house.
As far as supporting the American Revolution, both in 1777 and again in 1781 during the two Lawantaka encampments, the Millers played a key portion in billeting soldiers, in not only supplying ironwork such as shoeing horses for Washington's troops.
The historical record suggests that General Washington may have visited the Miller homestead while in Bottle Hill, meeting with General Mad Anthony Wayne, who was residing in the historic Sayre House, which still stands a mile up the road from the Miller House. Luke Miller's own military contributions occurred in 1776, when he joined the militia. Luke Miller's pension application states,
In the month of June 1776, he turned out and went into service as a volunteer when the British troops landed at Staten Island.
The outcome of the Revolutionary War. I liked working on and around the property. I found it interesting to do more hands-on work, and you really get to learn more about it when you actually get to see it.
The Madison High School students have immersed themselves in this project. They have gained an understanding of the contributions made by the previous residents of the community during our nation's struggle for independence, and they have come to appreciate the role Bottle Hill played in the economic development of the region.
American history, to me, is very diverse. I mean, there's so much to learn about it and so many places to look for it. You never know what you're going to find or how it's going to turn out.
Today, fortunately for the Luke Miller House and the town of Madison, the house is privately owned. Twice a year, the Luke Miller House is open to the public so that this piece of living history will still be available to all. Finally, in tracking recent efforts to save the historic structure from demolition, the students have come to value the work of historic preservationists. They have also learned to appreciate citizen action in maintaining and preserving important structures from the past.
It's extremely important to preserve our landmarks, our cornerstones of our memories. It's something we can pass along to other generations, but it's something you can learn from. Sometimes it's mistakes that we've made in the past, sometimes it's great accomplishments, but it's always good to know where you came from so you know where you're going.
It's almost obvious why we should have historic preservation even though we have to hammer it home again and again and again. Without the past, we can't possibly understand ourselves.